People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of First Time for Everything. I am your host, Juliet Rose. Tonight, we're here with Frank Martin. Please remember to go ahead and send us a star or a like to let us know how we're doing. And every time you contribute, you get entered into our season prize package drawing with gift card swag and more. So please give us some love. We definitely need it. And then tonight, we are talking to Frank Martin. He is quite the prolific author. He was like me. He writes a little bit of everything. So I'm going to let Frank introduce himself and tell you guys a little bit about what he does.
Hi, Frank Martin. I am an author and comic writer. I do both, and I kind of dabble in a little bit of everything, every genre, every medium. I like the challenge of storytelling, which means being outside my comfort zone and doing different things. Right now, my main comic series is called Grimspace, which is a combination of fairy tales mashed up in like a sci-fi universe. So I'm having fun with that. It's a comic series. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And do you have like a website or a place that people can find you?
Yes. FrankTheWriter.com is my website. Got tons of free goodies and other stuff on there. Frank the Writer is also my social handle. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those wonderful places at Frank the Writer is where you can find me.
Very cool. So it's cool. We were kind of talking briefly before the show about the fact that you're cross-genre, you write a few different things. So I guess going back to like when this all began for you, what was like the first thing? What was like the first time you knew you wanted to be a writer, and which area were you leaning in that way?
It's kind of emblematic because when everybody says, well, Frank, if you had to pick one genre, what would it be? The answer is horror. And so it's weird that when I look back, my first story was a horror story. I remember, I'm sure tons of people remember when they were in elementary school, everybody gets creative writing assignments. I remember in first grade, the first story I wrote that I remember, it was about, I don't know, zombies rising on Halloween, coming out of a graveyard. And I remember it so vividly. And I'm like, this is awesome. I'm having fun with this. And all the other kids were just like, okay. Like so. And my kind of writing origin story is that I took that story and I just never stopped. I just kept writing other stories. Some I've completely forgot about. My dad pulled one out a couple months ago. Apparently, I wrote a story in elementary school about building a time machine for a kid to go back in time to learn about so that he could write his history paper. Like he needed the time machine. So he pulled it out and he's like, remember this from third grade? I go, no. So yeah, it's weird how much when you write at such a young age, how much you've written and you've forgotten so much about what you put down on paper.
I think so. I think it's like a lot of practice. Because I also wrote from a very young age. I don't have any of it, obviously. It's like but it was like really kind of led up to writing. Like, because each time I wrote something, I think I got a little better. I got a little more determined what I wanted to write. You have creative writing. They're like, write about this. But when I could actually say, I want to write about something, then I got to choose. Although I'm like you, I kind of choose whatever. It's really very mood based. So how you said you were third grade when you started writing?
I think that first story was in first grade, actually. The
the
whole zombie Halloween one. Because, they say, they write, what did you do this weekend? And then sometimes they just let you write whatever. And that's kind of what I wrote. I do remember another story I wrote. I think this was 8th grade. And the teacher said, you can write whatever you want. And for some reason, I was really into Mortal Kombat at the time. So I go, can I write a Mortal Kombat fight scene? And she goes, if you want to, like, I guess. So it was fun having two of my favorite Mortal Kombat characters. There's no dialogue. There's no story. It's just them doing Kung Fu moves back and forth. And she gave me a good grade on it, but it was like, it was weird. Everybody else was writing, like, I don't know, going to their grandma's for the weekend or whatever. And I decided to just write about two supernatural beings fighting in a other dimension. So I always kind of love to press my imagination, and it's been a lot of fun.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think I'm the same way too. Like I always say, like I would start out telling the truth, and I'd be like, "What'd you do this weekend?" And I would start out with the truth, and then it would eventually become a lie. And that's really how I write. I still do it to this day. Like I start out with true things, and then I just make up the rest. So
it's funny you say that, because my name is Frank. Leonard is my middle name. And Frank was one of my grandfathers on my paternal side. On my maternal side, he was Leonard. So it was a combination of Frank and Leonard. And then we had to write a story about where our names came from. And I wrote a story. It was about how my parents wanted to name me after their fathers, but they didn't know which would be first, which one would be middle. So they flipped a coin, and that's how I came up with Frank Leonard. And she goes, Frank, this is a remarkable story. Did they really flip a coin? I go, no, I made it up. It's right. It was a good tale, and it's just funny that it was like I took a truth of my name. My grandfathers were actually named Frank and Leonard, and I just kind of made up some fabricated.
Made up the rest of it, yeah. That's cool. So you started writing young. When did you? So like obviously we evolved. We start writing. When did you really start to say this is what I want to do? Like what age were you in? What did you really kind of focus on?
So I think around high school time is when I really focused on fan fiction. That's how so many geeks and people that are into media, they want to write their own stories with these characters. And my fan fiction was like full length. I wrote a lot of stuff, and I threw it. It's all online now for free at fanfiction.net. But I wrote a lot. And at some point I decided, you know what, I've done enough practice with characters that aren't my own. Let me do my own characters. And I wrote a novel. And it was in high school. It was really bad, but it was like my baby. So I always kept tinkering with it. I always kept trying to do it. And even after I had published works later in life, I never let it go. And I did eventually publish it. It became a book called A Weapon's Journey, which was a science fiction story. But it's cool that to look back on something I started in high school that was awful, that I just never let it go. And it was eventually published. So it's weird that the first thing I called my attempt at a novel wasn't my first published novel. I eventually came back to it and tried to. I never let anything go. I have a writer OCD like that.
Yeah, that's good though. Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to another writer, and she was saying something. She had something. She started at 13, put it aside, and then much later in life, kind of picked it up and said, "I'm going to do." And she didn't put it out as is. She just took elements that she really liked from it and turned it into a story. And I find that really admirable, because I think part of my thing is I just lose things. Like, I'll write, no idea where I put it.
I try to recycle everything. I try not to. It doesn't matter what it is. I have a folder. It might just say garbage, but it's stuff that's in there that I could dig into if I need to. I never want to waste an idea or a thought. So it's weird, writers like that. We never want to. You can tell when we work with editors, we never want to. No, I need that sentence.
No, I need it. It's mine. It's important. It has to be here. I still remember that in college. Like I had my college professor for English, and I had just a sentence in a paper I turned in, and she's like, it's really not necessary. I'm like, yes, it is. Would not. She still gave me 100 on it, but she was like, you have to understand, like, you don't have to put in everything that you think is interesting. And I'm like, yeah, I do. So, so the first book that you actually published, what book was that?
So the first book that I published, I don't remember. It's so weird because when you write, you have so many false starts. Yeah. I tried to write a whole bunch of screenplays before I was married, before I had kids, and it wasn't until my first son was born. He's going to be 12 in August. So when he was born, I said, you know what, I'm going to just cut the BS. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to write a full-length novel and try to become a published author. That book's still not published, sitting on my computer. Okay. So it's weird how you write something, you try to submit it, it doesn't work, you shelve it, you work on something else. I had another book that had a publishing contract, fell through, wasn't published. And then so it's hard to look back and say this was actually my first official published novel. And it was called Mountain Sickness. It was published with Severed Press. It was about essentially a zombie attack on a ski resort. And it was like I had that idea because zombies are all about where they take place. You know, zombies on the moon, zombies in the Washington, D.C. So I'm like, somebody had to make a zombie attack on a ski resort. And I couldn't really find one. So I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do it. And that was like my first official 100,000 word plus novel that was put out.
Wow. And how many books do you have out now, including like comics and?
Oh, I don't know, 24 maybe.
Okay.
Including comics. About novels, I think I have maybe a half a dozen novels, and then I have maybe a dozen more that are just sitting on my computer collecting dust because I have that I finish something and then I forget that I have to put it out. I just kind of go into the next thing. So I have novels I finished that I've never submitted anywhere just because I don't know. It's boring to fight
submit.
With.
I mean, it's definitely boring to submit.
It's boring. It's a lot of hard work, and it keeps me from writing. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's interesting because like I'm the opposite. I can't move on to the next thing until I'm done with something. Like I have to have it off my plate, just done, out of my hair. Then I can move on to something else. But I always have ideas in my head, so like I'm always ready to start the next one. I just have to get rid of the first one to do that.
Well, comics it's weird. It's two different dynamics for me. I don't really self-publish my novels. I kind of work with publishers to put them out. But I'm crowdfunding. I'm self-publishing a lot of my comics work, which focus on a release schedule. So I can't really stop something because it's just everything is in the future. You know, you got to plan 2 years out for that release, and you got to get art for this, and you got to do writing for this. So it kind of backs up, and that if you stop and you worry about one thing coming out, it will kind of be hard to keep that momentum going.
Right, you hit that wall. So you said you're crowdfunding. What's your crowdfunding? Do you have like a?
I work on Kickstarter right now. I was talking about Grim Space. I have a 60-page, it's the longest graphic novel I've done so far, and it's my 24th crowdfunding campaign. And it's a lot of work, kind of building up a following because it's all on your shoulders. You can't really rely on a whole lot of people. So, but the comics community in particular is very cohesive and loving. So people rally, especially when you're crowdfunding indie comics. People want to see you succeed. So it's nice to have that backing.
That's really cool. Do you have not a link, but do you have like where people can find you on Kickstarter?
I don't know if you could share a link, but you could Google if you're on Kickstarter and you just look up Grim Space with Grimm, Grimm. So like Grimm's Fairy Tales.
Space. Okay,
that's the title.
Cool.
So
I'll have to look that up. That's really cool. Yeah, I tried to do a Kickstarter earlier in the year for an anthology that I'm working on, and it didn't work out. So I moved to Indiegogo because I just couldn't get to like the minimum. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm not really great on that stuff.
You have to look at each crowdfunding campaign as a business. You know, is a lot involved, especially when you're dealing with merchandise and shipping and printing. Kickstarter link is in the description.
Okay, perfect. Awesome.
Thank you.
I'm assuming that's Joe. Thank you, Joe. He's like hiding behind the scenes.
The omnipotent voice comes in, delivers the goods.
Go in now. Yes. Okay, so let's talk about some of the roadblocks that you have faced with putting out. You said so you go through publishers for your novels. You self-publish for your comic books. Is that correct?
For the most part, yeah.
So what are some of the roadblocks you faced, I guess, doing both of those? I guess either or.
The roadblocks with working with publishers is when they want to tell you no. That's
a pretty big one, yeah.
That's the big one. I mean, I haven't had a big book published, but I've worked with a whole bunch of indie publishers. And the great thing about working with indie publishers is that they tend to be writers too, so they understand where you're coming from, and they know how your work is important to you, and so they're very accommodating. They're very understanding. And I've been fortunate enough with the publishers that I've worked with who have said yes to my stuff. There haven't really been any roadblocks after that initial yes. They work with me on cover art, they work with me on editing, and I'm happy with everything that's been put out so far. As far as comics, the biggest roadblock is money, really. It's putting comics out is very expensive. To get good artists, to get good logos, to cut costs, I started lettering my own comics. So putting the word balloons and the sound effects. I did it as a way to cut costs, but I've come to appreciate it as an art form in its own right. You know, people do this professionally for big time comic publishers, and it's hard and it's not easy. And there's so many little choices you can make. And I've come to appreciate it as just another tool in my toolbox that I can work with. And I love being able to write the story and then put the finishing touches on it in the artwork with the words. Having those bookends is real nice. But yeah, I'm not an artist. I'm terrible. I can't even draw stick figures. That's how bad I am. So getting top tier artists and working with them to put out a whole bunch of pages, it costs a lot of money. So that's where the crowdfunding comes in.
Okay, that's really good to know. Yeah, I'm an artist, but like not on that level. So like I'm working on a graphic novel, but I'm having an artist work on stuff. Because I mean, I can do stuff. But even just the speed, like this artist can just whip out something in 15 minutes or whatever. I mean, I take forever, hours to just draw something really basic. So yeah, that's
artists is interesting because there's so many different styles, and people don't like to say there's not bad art. There's just different looking art, and that can be improved. But still, there's so many different ways that art can portray a story. So one of the favorite things I love to do is tailor stories for specific artists. You know, I could write a story and then go out looking for an artist that fits that. But yeah, if I see an artist and they're willing to work with me, I'll write something from scratch that's built around their specific style and vibe. And I love that. Like I said, I like the challenge of storytelling, you know, the solving of the puzzle. So if somebody has an art style and they want to work with me, solving the puzzle, building a story around them is fun.
It's almost like making a song, you know, somebody that can write the lyrics, somebody that can write the music, and you put it together and it's perfect. That's awesome. And I know artists appreciate that, because my daughter's an artist and she's like, I hate when people want me to do something that's not my style. And that's, I think, really valid, you know, because I mean, you know, finding that and then being able to match that really makes a more cohesive product, I think.
That's the main difference between prose writing and comics, is that comics is a collaborative medium. You know, I'm not really I'm using the artist as a kind of a vehicle to tell my story. Whereas when I write a novel, it's a direct shot right to the reader. So you have that one-to-one connection. They're going to read my words. Whereas with a comic, it's more of a collaborative process, and it's not just my baby. You know, I have a partner, and we made a baby together.
Yeah. Very good. All right. So let's kind of, talking about Roblox, let's get into like negative reviews or negativity, and as how that affects you as an artist. No. Yes, let's do it. So talk about maybe like the first time you kind of had that negative feedback, and did it impact how you thought about your work, or did you just see that as kind of a rule of the road?
You know, I don't really remember. I think like most first-time writers and authors, when I had people critiquing my stuff in a negative light, it hurts. You know, you're putting something out there, you're vulnerable. A lot of people clap back and they lash out. I didn't really do that, but I had to, you know, it's kind of like the stone in a river, you know, it's jagged and it's rough, but the water rushes over it enough times, it becomes smooth. I think that's the same thing with writers. You get beat up enough times, you get enough constructive criticism and negative feedback that after a while you're just like, okay, and it doesn't really hurt anymore. So when did that happen? I don't really know. Well, I've been writing so long. I've gotten so many people telling me I stink. So maybe I blocked it out.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, there's a quote by Rumi that's something like that says, you know, how will you ever be polished if you get bothered by every little rub? And I've always thought about that one. Oh, look, puppy. And I think that's true. It's like you have to look at, you know, not everybody's going to love you. Not everybody's going to love your work. People might like your work, but not like certain elements. So like, I think ultimately when you look at kind of like that feedback, you just say, is there something I can take out of this that's productive? If not, move on, you know?
I would say the first time I really felt like a writer was when I was put in a position to get negative feedback, and then I didn't. So I took a creative writing class in college, and I wrote a story. It was essentially a YA drama about a boy who had a crush on a girl, and he wants to make a move, or she wants him to make a move, and he doesn't, and she ends up leaving, and nothing happens. The sparks, they don't hit it off. There's no happy ending to that love story. And
The
I was
life.
yeah, the life. So the way they worked in these critique circles is that you sit in the class and you're not allowed to say anything, and you just watch everybody talk about your story and tear it apart. And they didn't tear it apart. What happened was half of the class thought it was the boy's fault for not making a move, and half of the class thought it was the girl's fault for not telling them how she felt. And they began arguing. They were arguing about these characters that I made, and they're not like critiquing the story. Instead, they're taking sides and defending the story from their own point of view. And it was like, it felt good that they're supposed to be giving me feedback about the story, but instead they loved it so much that they felt obligated to defend their point of view. So yeah, that was a cool moment that I realized, hey, I might be at least a little good at this.
Right. I might not stink at this. Well, that's good too, because yeah, they went past that and they were invested in the characters. You did good. I mean, that's what ultimately we want people to do, is be invested in the character. So that's really cool. So you talked about your father finding your thing. Who first believed in you, and in what way did they support your dream?
I'm still looking for that person.
Oh no.
I'm married with 3 kids, and my wife is, you know what, in her defense, she can't read like a book with a lot of characters. She needs to focus on just one character. So she'll read some of my stuff if they're shorter and just single character focused. But I find them to be supportive in auxiliary ways. I haven't really found a champion to kind of push me along, or super be like, yeah, Frank, you could do this. So, but you know what? It feels more, I don't know, rewarding in the end when you get up in the morning and you're motivating yourself and kind of pushing through.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm in the same boat. Nobody in my house really reads what I write. So I'm just like, occasionally they will read something, but it's pretty rare. So I push myself along. I
mean, like you mentioned my dad, I think he's proud on a conceptual level. But I don't think he's ever made it past the first page of anything I wrote.
All right. Yeah, I can relate to that, actually. If you were going to talk to, so somebody came to you and they said, Frank, it's a new writer, and they said, I'm really discouraged. I really don't know what I do. And let's talk about comic books, because you've talked about like kind of more of the difficultness with that. I really want to write comic books, but I don't think I can. What advice would you give them to get started or to keep going?
There's so many good classes out there. If they were really invested, I would say take a class, learn how to the craft from the bottom up. If they said, no, I just want to jump into it, my advice would be to start small and be consistent. Write every single day. It doesn't matter if it's like, and that goes for prose too. It's momentum. It doesn't matter if it's a sentence or two. You just gotta, it's easy when you don't write to keep not writing. I'm sure you know that. So I would say just keep at it, be consistent, and start small. Everybody wants to do their magnum opus right from the get-go.
Right.
Me too. That's why I didn't publish that book for decades after I finished that first one. But yes, start with tell a 5-page short story comic. It's learn how to tell a story in a small confined space before you kind of blow it up and try to do some big long form epic.
Yeah. Do you use this a lot of classes? Do you know of any particular ones like online, YouTube that you would recommend?
I would say the best class to take for online comic tutorials is a website called Comics Experience. Okay. I use them to learn how to letter. I've done a couple writing classes with them for fun. They're just good. They're taught by comic pros who have experience in the industry. They knows the ins and outs, and they can really give you the little tips that you're not going to get from someone who's just, let's say, a college professor who knows how to write comics but isn't really entrenched in those in the industry.
So I'm kind of curious, because I know that like with audiobooks, I had this conversation with people. We're talking about audiobooks, and we're talking about like having somebody else work on your story with you. It can be really positive, but it can also be really negative, or you can kind of get into like contention with that person. Have you ever been in that situation with a comic book artist where you felt like they weren't kind of seeing your vision, or maybe you weren't seeing theirs?
I've never had an issue where I was just like, this isn't working. We're not vibing together. But it is a push and a pull, because when you write a story, you have a specific image in your head. And when it doesn't pan out that way, your first reaction is, no, I want it to look this way. But you have to, so when you hire an artist, or when you're working with one and you partner, you have to place a little bit amount of trust in them. You trust in their vision. They're allowed to put their artistic footprint on it. The only time I would really push to change something is if what they did altered the story in some way. Like, it's not the experience is different because of a choice that they made, whether it's a different angle or a character's walking when they should be standing. You can't nitpick, because you can't tell them, you can't give them a whole manuscript of notes, right? You only want to give them as few notes as possible, change the things that are important. So yeah, there has to be a little bit of swallowing of pride there, and understand that you put the pencil in their hands. You can't control them 100%.
Sure. What time frame, like, process is it usually to do a whole comic book, like with the art and with the?
It depends. I can write a script very fast. I know artists that work very fast, and we could have a book done in a month.
Oh,
but,
wow. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, that's like super duper lightning fast times table. It's possible. I could work with an artist and do that. But at the same time, I think there's a benefit to telling an artist, look, you don't have a deadline. I'll tell you if you're getting close to when I need it done, but work on this when you have a free moment, as long as you're making some progress on it. That freedom allows them to pick up other projects, but maybe relax and try different things with pages. When they're not under the gun, it gives them a lot of breathing room to get out their best work. So I try to give artists a lot of time to just get it done whenever. So I have projects that sometimes take a year to get all the art in and stuff. So there's no set time frame. It needs to be done by the time I launch on Kickstarter. And I set launch dates before I hire artists sometimes. Okay. So I'm like, look, I have a 100% finish deadline. I'd like you to finish a month or two before that. But
sure.
But it's about being cooperative. People don't like somebody bossing them around and being a real stickler.
Especially creative people.
Yeah. So I try to be a little loose and carefree with at least the administrative stuff,
Have you ever had to break ties with an artist, or?
I've never broken ties with artists, but I've had plenty of artists drop out of projects simply because it's a lot of work. A lot of people know how to draw, but doing a comic sequential artwork is completely different than just making a pretty picture. So sometimes I try to work with artists, and it's their first comic, and they realize, look, I'm way in over my head. I just can't.
Right.
Do it. So I've had a lot of those false starts in a lot of projects, and sometimes they fall apart. Sometimes I find a replacement. So.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think people don't know the difference. Like I said, I do art as well, but like I could never do comics. Like the sheer amount of work and consistency from page to page is just a lot,
So it is a static image, and you could look at a lot of cover artists, right? They have static images, and they're like, and they're great. But a comic is a free-flowing story, It has to even though there's no motion there, you have to convey motion from one panel to the next. And that means that a lot of people that could do great covers can't do interiors, because it's a skill that needs to be honed, creating like a narrative cinematic story from static images. It's hard. So the ones that are good at it, there's a reason that they're well-known names in the industry.
For sure. Yeah, it's impressive. I still buy comic books because I never gave that up. And I will, I'll go to conventions and I'll see comic books, and I pick it, and I'm always just so impressed. Because just the amount of work that goes, people don't, I think they think in their minds, comic books, they think, that it's not as difficult as it is, or time consuming or expensive. And so they're like, well, why is this comic book the same price as a book? Well, it's impressive. I mean, the amount of work that goes into making the story consistent, the art consistent, the flow, there's ones that definitely fall flat. And then there's ones that, you're like, wow, this is really impressive. And I still collect them. So I'll give you a lot of props for that.
There's been a huge revolution and a renaissance over decades from the 60s and 70s, comics being a young kids medium on the spinner racks in drugstores. And those artists, they were working overtime, pumping out stories. So their art was a little bit rough. But as the medium gained a lot more legitimacy, you have real storytellers doing long form stories, artists spending more time on the artwork. And there's incredible stories that are being published by comics now that wasn't out there, decades and decades ago. So there's comics. I don't think they have a bestsellers list for graphic novels anymore in New York Times, but they used to, and it's become pretty legitimate. So I'm happy to see where the medium is at.
Yeah, me too. Let's talk about a couple firsts. So are you a person that when you're presented with a situation, are you the first one to do it? So say a challenge, are you the first one, or do you sit back and wait for other people to do it, see if they fail, see if they succeed, and then do it?
Depends on the context.
That's me, yeah.
Yes, I would say yes. I'm definitely somebody that would try things. I'm not that shy or laid back. I would, I like trying new things. And as a writer, I think you need to experience stuff. So I have no problem jumping in and trying to do it. That said, I am not saying yes to anything. So I know what it is. so yeah, I definitely would do it unless there's some strategic reason I need somebody else to go first so I can see how well they do.
That sometimes I'll do because I'll be like, let me see how this works out for you. So I can do it better or right,
But you know what? I have a lot of foolish pride. So if somebody says, well, why do you want to not go first? Because you're chicken. I would be like, no, I'm doing it. Now I have to do it. So
that's hilarious.
I've gotten into a lot of trouble that way.
So if you do something for the first time and you fail at it, maybe it's embarrassing. Is this something that you feel like, okay, I'm learning from this, I'm going to do better next time, I'm going to try again? Or do you say to yourself, well, I tried it, I failed, I'm walking away?
It depends on what it is, Yeah. I have a very vivid memory of being like 7th grade, and I could do a 1.5 flip off the high dive at my local pool. And so I would do a flip and I land in a dive, and I'm like, I'm going to try to do 2 this time. And I did the first one, and then I tried to do the second one, and I landed flat on my back, and it hurt a lot. And I did not try to do that again.
Yeah.
I was done with that. But there's plenty of stuff that I've done, and I've done it over and over and over and over until I got it right. So I guess the pain was definitely a determining factor in me not wanting to try it again. But yeah, when I get something in my head that I want to get it done, I'm determined and I want to go for it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely somewhat of a writer trait too. Like we are somewhat stubborn. I was when you said that though, I was thinking about like belly flopping at the pool and like, yeah, not only was it embarrassing, it was painful.
Close enough to a belly flop. It was a back flop.
Yeah,
so
that's pretty
was
painful.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that twice. So you write novels, graphic novels, and comic books, correct?
Yes.
What out of those 3 would you say your heart's most in, or is it pretty equally spread?
You can't make me choose.
It's like choosing children, right?
I have a blast with comics because it's collaborative medium. There's such a big community around it, and not that the indie novel community isn't tight knit, but you can sit in your house by yourself, never contact anyone, and be an author. It's
Right.
kind of hard to do that as a comic creator. Even people that write and do the art all by themselves, it's still hard to just jump in head first and do absolutely everything without feedback or people giving you tips or this or that. And so there is a very cohesive nature, collaborative nature to the medium of comics that I love. At the same time, like I said before, I love that direct contact that writing prose has to a reader. It's a direct shot. I write words and somebody reads them. It's like, it doesn't get more simple than that. So being able to have that unfiltered access to a reader's brain is powerful. And I love that about that form of storytelling.
Yeah, I agree with that. You can go back and talk to your younger self and give yourself advice about what you're doing. Is there anything that you would do differently, or would you keep the same path?
I don't know. Start writing younger. That's always the answer. It's hard. It's hard to
agree.
tell someone who's been writing since they were 7 to start writing younger. But I don't know. It's mainly like logistical stuff, like business stuff.
Yeah.
From a storytelling perspective, I love my storytelling journey and where I'm at. But there's certain like inroads where I went left and wish I went right. That I might have be in a different place in my career, and I would just. That's the kind of advice I would give. Not necessarily creative stuff, but administrative and business stuff and all the logistics that go into trying to do this crazy trade of ours.
I like that. And I think a lot of people don't think about the business side of it as much. Like, I mean, authors eventually do because we have to get into it. But I don't think people realize how much of the business side goes into what we do. I mean, like people say, well, do you write every day? I'm like, well, I do something every day. So I might write, but I might market that day. Instead, spend a certain amount of time doing that. And I didn't do that when I was younger. And, so I didn't understand the business side of it. And then I took a hiatus for like 15 years, but I didn't really understand it. And coming back to it, I understood that. And that same thing, I wish I understood better, that's equally as important as the writing.
It's also weird because the landscape has shifted so much so quickly. It's hard to go back to my younger self and be like, look, there's going to be this thing called Twitter. It's eventually going to be horrible. But in the very beginning, you need to jump on board and go all in. So it's hard to like predict where things are going to be. I mean, everybody was all about Instagram and all this, and then TikTok came and blew it all up and did their own different things. So it's weird being those first innovators. So having that insight, that Back to the Future moment where you could jump on something knowing that it's going to be big right at the beginning, would be very beneficial.
That those didn't exist back in the day. So, and they may not exist in a year. I mean, you never know what's going to be the thing. Like Twitter was really big and now really nobody uses it. TikTok might not be around. So then there's new things popping up all the time. So it's hard to keep track of all the different things. What would you say is the thing that helps you the most with your marketing?
Helps me the most with what?
With like marketing, like if you're trying to get out to people, just getting your stuff out there.
This is not going to be a great answer, but email lists are probably, I think, the most important thing, which is hard because how do you get people on your email list? Well, you need to go to like social media and get people involved that way, but you need to find ways to get people on your email list, because if somebody likes you and they want to hear from you, emailing directly to their inbox, it really doesn't get better than that, because you post on social media, you're relying on somebody else's platform. Whereas with an email list, you control it and it's right to them. And if you do that consistent and have that contact, that communication with them once a month, twice a month, telling them about launches, telling them about things that you're working on, I think that's the best way to make readers know, like, and trust you. And people aren't going to buy from you unless they know, like, and trust you.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. It's actually an area I have held off on because I always feel like I'm impeding, but I hear people say it enough that they're like, they're signing up for it. They want it. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's true.
They could take down Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and TikTok tomorrow. They're not going to cancel email, So I think it's important having that power. Like I said, with lettering comic books, I feel like the more power I consolidate for myself, the better off I am. Not relying on somebody else to letter my books, not relying on another platform to get my word out. The more things that I can control, it's more empowering for me in my career.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good point. And plus, even if they don't go away, the algorithms bury so much stuff that you don't even know if what you're posting is getting out there anyway.
I hear people complain about it all the time. So it's definitely frustrating. Screaming into the void.
Yeah, and there's no point because they're not listening. So, All right, let me just move this real quick. Here's my favorite question. What is a first you'd rather forget?
I don't know. This requires some thought. You can't just drop this on somebody. A first I'd rather forget. I don't know.
I'll give you some people have said their first marriage, some people have said their first kiss, some people have said their first performance or presentation or whatever it is. So it could be anything. It doesn't have to be related.
What I wish I could, I wouldn't say forget because I think it's a valuable lesson, but something I wish I could undo was my first publishing deal, the one I said that fell through.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something every creative needs to go through. You need to be screwed over at least once.
Been there. Yeah.
To get that rough skin, to get a little calluses on your hands. So it's an important lesson, but it hurt when it happened, you know. So I don't want to forget the lesson, but I want to forget the emotional aspect of it, because it was like, it felt discouraging to put your trust and faith into somebody who felt like they had your back, and then they didn't. So, yeah.
Yeah, I actually just had the conversation with Joe, because when I went back to writing, I was sending out to people, and I had actually 3 different publishers burn me for like in a year. And I was like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. Like, it definitely, like, for just a moment, because actually what it did was then set my resolve to push myself harder to do it myself. But yeah, I think that, and authors need to know that, you know, even if you get a publishing deal, they do sometimes fall through. It's just, you know, it is the way it is. So
it's kind of it's altered my expectations in a way. So when I do go into a deal now, I'm like, look, I don't care how friendly they are. I could only count on them to look out for themselves. And if they do help me along the way, great, but I'm not going to expect it. I'm only going to expect them to do the bare minimum. And anything above that is great. So it's all about what type of perspective and expectations you have.
I think that's really smart. Yeah. And I think that, you know, when we first get that first publishing deal, we're so excited because, like, somebody wants to buy our words, you know, that we tend to go in a little bit rose-colored glasses, you know. But I do think that it is a good experience, because then the next time you say, okay, I remember this happened last time. I need to check this. I need to do this, whatever. So I think that is good advice. It doesn't mean don't do it. It means just go in a lot smarter, you know.
And it's hard too, seeing first timers and people that are just kind of learning the ropes, and they get a publishing deal and they say, my publisher, they're not marketing my work. I'm like, I got bad news for you.
Right.
None of them do. It's just kind of the way it is. So it's hard seeing people in the position that I used to be in and trying to give them tips and trying to say, look, I'm sorry that it just didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, but it didn't turn out the way any of us want to. And it's just kind of a rite of passage a little bit in a way.
Yeah. And it's good they're getting tips from us. Cause I mean, I had a writer reach out not so long ago, and she asked that. She said, you know, I know you indie publish. She's like, you know, and she was asking, I said, this is what happened. This was my experience. You know, definitely try, if that's what you want to do, try, but understand that even if you do get a signed contract, and even if they do publish your book, it doesn't mean you're hands off. You're still going to be doing the work. So just keep that in mind, unless you're like the big 5 or big 4 now, I guess. But, you know, and even then they have their sledge ones. There are people that publish, they still don't work it, you know, so it definitely is good advice to understand as a writer that no matter what you're doing, you own your processes.
It's a weird industry in that there are so many milestones and achievements that we work so hard for, and we get, and we're super excited, and we're like, yes, but now I have to work twice as hard.
Right.
It's hard to celebrate these achievements and milestones when they're just the first step on a
exactly. It's just walk. It's getting up the hill. You're just taking steps.
It's the ladder that never ends. So
this was in reference to the email list. The way I look at it is less intrusive, because if you didn't want it, you could opt out. It's harder to do that on social media. That's true. I mean, I think it gives people a little more control.
They have spam laws that say you have to have an unsubscribe button at the bottom of your email if you're going to be emailing people. So yeah, you know what? Another thing that they teach you is that if you have an email list and people unsubscribe to your list, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. You don't want people taking up a spot that don't want to be there. So
exactly.
I've called my list so many times from people that just weren't opening it, because the smaller the list, the more personal it is, and you don't want to have that shotgun approach.
I agree. Yeah, I unsubscribe and things that read. So I agree. Anita said, let me show here. She had an anthology. It went away. I had an anthology publisher folded me, and one that died. Yeah, I mean, during COVID, I had one that closed, one that had a bad contract, and then one that just quit paying royalties or talking to his people. So I think that, you know, you find a good publisher, yay, appreciate it. There's a lot out there that are in over their heads as well.
It's hard. You know, it's I think understanding that what they do is not easy. It's a labor of love for a lot of them.
Right.
So, like I said, expectations, perspective, and mindset are everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that you have a really good kind of like attitude about it. And I think that's, when I see authors and I see the ones that get really frustrated and they want to quit, a lot of times it's because they don't have that perspective. They're wanting it here, now, fast, and money. And it's just not. You're doing it. We're doing it out of a labor of love too. Like as a writer, like we're writing because we love it, or we should be. It may never pay off. So that's the thing you have to tell yourself is like, I'm doing this because I love it. Yes, I want it to pay off, obviously, but also it may not. And so I think having an attitude of going in just a lot more chill about the experience helps us kind of work better with, say, publishers or agents.
The question I like to pose to writers, I say, look, if the writing gods came down and cursed you and said any words you ever write, they're going to be printed out, go into an attic, and nobody will ever see them, would you continue to write? And I think my answer would be yes. If it doesn't matter how many bad experiences I have with publishers, I'm never going to stop writing. Right. So it's kind of hard to just be so down about all of these bad experiences, because at the end of the day, I'm still going to be doing it. So why be so upset about it? Just keep on keeping on.
Yeah, it's an innate drive. I think you saying that, when you were writing, I was the same way. I was very young, just making up stories. It's not about publishing. It's about that drive to put the words on paper, and that's, I think, for why there's some people keep at it and some people don't, because some people are like, well, it didn't pay off, so I'm going to quit. I could never do that,
I have some friends who, I have so many ideas, and as you know, a lot of writers have ideas. They could have 10 lifetimes and never write every single idea that they have. But I don't want to be the only person to experience these ideas. So I have friends that I just send messages of like a premise or a character idea to, and we laugh about it together. And then so at least somebody shared it. Right, yeah. The stupid idea that came into my head. I call my friend Chuck my idea dumpster, because I just dump all my ideas on him. And then, because I don't want to feel compelled to like write down everything that I do. So having at least one person experience the stupidity of my mind is nice.
Sorry, Chuck. That's you. All right. Well, I don't have any more questions, I think, that are necessarily, huge that we need to go over to. But I am going to bring up the wheel and we'll spin that and do that a few times and see what comes up with that. So let me present my screen real quick.
Sure. I think we covered a lot.
We did. Can you see my screen?
Can I see your screen? Yes, I can.
Okay, let's give it a spin and see what comes up. All right. First album bought.
First album bought. My first album was Smash by The Offspring.
Awesome.
What year was that?
I don't know.
96?
I was saying 96 is what I was thinking. 96, 97. So I'm not sure though.
Let's see here. 1992?
What? Really?
Really?
That makes me feel very old.
Let's see here. I don't know. This is not 1994.
94. Okay. That's not as bad.
2 years, it makes a big difference.
It does. Okay, so I always put myself in the hot seat too. I remember, honestly, like the one I can remember is I bought Wish You Were Here, Pink Floyd. I'm not sure that was the first, but I was big radio. Like back then the radio was good. So I listened to the radio mostly, had my cassette tapes that I would record real quick if I heard something come on. But I remember buying that. Was like my first full like album that I bought.
It's kind of one of those things. I don't know if that was the first album I ever bought, but it's the most vivid first memory I have of of listening to a CD to death. Buying it, having a Walkman. I had a Walkman. It was called a MASH Walkman, and I decided to take a little pen and write S in front of it because I just played that CD so much it became. And that's the memory. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's apocryphal or not. I'm going with it as the truth.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like pivotal. Like regardless if it was like the first thing you bought, I'm sure the first one I bought was probably something terrible, actually. But the first one that really I bought that mattered to me, yeah, was Pink Floyd. So, all right, let's spin the wheel again. We're on a music kick tonight. First concert.
First concert. First concert. I'm gonna give two answers. My first official concert was Weird Al.
Oh, okay, cool.
That was a lot of fun. But it was a smaller concert because he didn't take up a whole huge venue. But I think my dad bought me tickets to Smashing Pumpkins, and he didn't want that to be my first concert, so he brought me to Weird Al as like a buffer, like an intro concert. Two very different concerts, but yeah, 90s kid going to see Smashing Pumpkins at Madison Square Garden. It was kind of a fun experience.
That is a big deal. Yeah, wow. I think my first concert was Midnight Oil. Everybody remembers Midnight Oil. But the first one I remember very excited about was actually Pink Floyd as well. They came through, but it was not with, it was with David Gilmour. So that was, the switch. But yeah, I saw that. But the first concert I ever saw was Midnight Oil. And they were trippy for sure.
Was it a big concert or was it small?
No, that one was small. It wasn't I lived in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time, and it was in the Civic Center. So it was small. Like we were sitting right there, I could see them, and he was just all over the stage, doing his thing, and it was fun.
Very cool.
Pink Floyd was huge. Pink Floyd was in a giant,
they're in a whole other stratosphere.
Yeah. It was. We were like way back what we could afford. So we were just really seeing everything in this little blip, but it was still a lot of fun, and I actually went twice, so that was good. All right, let's do one more spin and see what it comes up with.
Sure. What do we got?
First celebrity crush.
First celebrity crush. Oh, that's easy. Buffy. Sarah Michelle Gellar. I say as my wife is right here staring at me with evil eyes. No, for a geek, seeing Sarah Michelle Gellar fight vampires every week, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think who mine was. I don't know. I definitely had a lot of crushes. I remember Keanu Reeves, but I don't think he was my first one because I was a teenager by that point. I really can't remember who was it. I remember some soap opera star or something like that. But yeah, so I'm gonna have to go with
Buffy came out. I was in 4th grade when Buffy came out. So yeah, I was smitten. It was over for me from there.
Yeah. That's a fair one for sure. All right. Well, we have answered our questions and we have done the wheel. So I'm going to give you a chance to talk again about your work, where people can find you, if you have any events coming up, and what you're currently working on.
Right now, again, I'm Frank Martin, comic writer and author extraordinaire. This little handle is where you can find me on social media. Again, franktherewriter.com. That's kind of the best place to sign up for my mailing list and all that. What I'm working on, the Kickstarter I have now for Grimspace, that's kind of like my main series for the foreseeable future. I do 6 comics a year. All 6 of them are going to be Grimspace next year, so that's really what I'm working on. Was there anything else I was supposed to include in that?
Have any events or anything? Any appearances?
Events. Here in New York, there's a comic convention at Westchester County Center that I'm doing the 29th and 30th of June. So that's my next event, which I'm looking forward to. It's a local con, so local.
Do you do a lot of comic cons?
I don't. I just did one in February, which was my first one since 2020. So it's been a while, but they're great ways to get out, meet people. They're so hit or miss. You never really know how they're going to go, but there's nothing like that one-to-one connection, trying to make a fan one person at a time. So I do like that experience.
Yeah, I do. I've been doing quite a few this past couple of years, and same thing, hit or miss. But I have to always say to myself, why am I here? So it's not always, I was saying this, Joe, it's not always about sales. Sometimes it's about meeting people, making connections. I'm sure for you, even meeting other artists, because I'm sure you meet artists at those as well. And
again,
the artists that you...
It's about perspective and expectations, and when you go into something wanting to do. If you go to a convention hoping to make a profit, it might leave disappointed. But if you get a bunch of business cards, if you have a bunch of laughs, if you make a couple sales, get a couple people signed up to your email list while you're there, there's other ways for things to be success other than just making money.
Yeah, there's a lot of small wins, and I think a lot of people forget about those. But I've seen that over the years, just kind of building your network. You definitely have a lot of good advice. You should write a book on writing. So, just for other authors, you have a really good perspective about how to go about doing this. So I think that, you probably have a lot to offer somebody that's just starting out and doesn't really know what to expect from, yes, I'm a writer, but what to expect from everything else that comes along with that, once you put it out into the world.
Thank you. It's, there's a lot in writing. I'm sure writers will tell you all the time, writing is like 10% of my job.
Yeah. At best 50 is what I always say. Honestly, it's just one of those things. Like I always say it's the easy part, because it is the easy part. That's the part that's fun and creative, but then there's all the other goes to make it quality and then get out into the world. So I appreciate you joining us tonight, and I appreciate everybody who's tuned in. This has been a great show, a lot of laughs, and we enjoyed having you on, Frank. And, I'm glad I got to meet you, and I'll definitely check out your Kickstarter. So again, your Kickstarter is Grimm, GRIMM space.
Yeah. So okay. I'm not that clever. It's essentially taking Grimm's fairy tales and putting them into like a Star Wars universe. So
that is clever.
Grimm in space. That's
very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you again for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and get us out of here. And I want to thank everybody that listened in. And remember, it's always time for Go Indie Now.
Thank you.